Jai Hind and welcome to Open Court with MJ Akbar. Mr. Akbar is a well-known author, respected public intellect, and also one of India's former Foreign Affairs Minister. Mr. Akbar, we are also looking forward to your latest book called Dulali Sahib and the Black Zamindar, Racism and Revenge in the British Raj, which highlights the atrocities of the Raj from the view and prism of British authorities. Mr. Akbar, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
This is a special show due to the Republic Day celebration, and we would like to highlight the significance and the importance of this day, especially for our young viewers. So, let me start off with the first question, which is to understand the significance of Republic Day and also the difference between Independence Day and Republic Day.
Correct. And I suppose it always is important to reassert it because every generation must realize and understand what precisely is the difference. On 15th August 1947, which is our Independence Day, that is the day we can legitimately say that India won its struggle for freedom. We got political freedom. On 15th August, British authority was removed from our land. But in a curious anomaly, if you like, but perhaps more accurately, as part of the transition process, uh, India could not become legally independent until it had framed its own constitution. So far, we had been living under the constitution known really as the 1935 Act, which had been imposed on India by the British. This could only be replaced by, after the deliberations and the work that was to be done by the Constituent Assembly, which was already sitting. But it took time to prepare a new constitution, and this it duly did. This new constitution was ready by November 1949, and it was adopted on 26th November, I think, by the Constituent Assembly, but it became formal law only on 26th January 1950. And once this became the new law of the land, India ended what was used to be known as its dominion status. Now, what is a dominion? Dominion means that while the British government had been removed from our lives, the British monarchy still had a legal presence in our structure, in our political structure. With the end of dominion status and the adoption of our Indian constitution, the dominion status also removed, and India could be finally said to be fully, completely independent only on 26th January 1950 through the adoption of the legal framework of the new state.
अकबर साहब, जब 26 नवंबर 1949 को संविधान बनकर तैयार हो गया था, तो 2 महीने इंतजार क्यों किया गया? 26 जनवरी का ऐतिहासिक महत्व क्या है इस तारीख का?
26 जनवरी को इसलिए हमने चुना क्योंकि इसका एक ऐतिहासिक कारण था। हमारी आज़ादी की लड़ाई बहुत पहले से शुरू हुई थी, आप भी जानते हैं, लेकिन ये आज़ादी की लड़ाई एक तीव्र मोड़ उस दिन पकड़ी जब 1930 में या 1929-30 का जो लाहौर सेशन हुआ था दिसंबर में, उस सेशन में, कांग्रेस के उस सेशन में गांधी जी के नेतृत्व में, और जिस सेशन के प्रेसिडेंट थे पंडित जवाहरलाल नेहरू, उस सेशन में कांग्रेस ने एक रेजोल्यूशन पास की जिस रेजोल्यूशन का नाम था पूर्ण स्वराज रेजोल्यूशन। यानी कि उसके बाद कांग्रेस की जो दिशा थी, कांग्रेस के जो ऑब्जेक्टिव थे, कांग्रेस के जो लक्ष्य थे, जो हमारे नेशनल फ्रीडम मूवमेंट के लक्ष्य थे, वो अब किसी तरह का अंग्रेजी हुकूमत के साथ कॉम्प्रोमाइज या समझौता खत्म कर दिया और कहा कि अब हमारी आज़ादी की जो लड़ाई है वो पूर्ण स्वराज की लड़ाई है, वो किसी किस्म की मिलावटी स्वराज की लड़ाई अब हम नहीं मानेंगे। तो इस रेजोल्यूशन को नेशनली जब पास हुआ तो बहुत बड़ा दिन था, ऐतिहासिक दिन था। तो गांधी जी ने फिर कहा, तय किया कि भाई इतना बड़ा रेजोल्यूशन पास हो गया, इसकी जश्न जो है सारे देश के हर कोने में मनानी चाहिए, क्योंकि आज से हमारी ये एक मॉडर्न इंडिया, एक नई इतिहास की शुरुआत है। लेकिन इस जश्न को के प्रिपरेशंस में, ये तैयारी में नेचुरली समय लगते थे, तो उन्होंने फिर तय किया कि 26 जनवरी को हम पूर्ण स्वराज का रेजोल्यूशन जो है, 26 जनवरी 1930 को हम पूर्ण स्वराज का रेजोल्यूशन हमारे देश के हर कोने में मनाएंगे। तो इसीलिए जब 26 जनवरी को हम आज ये एक अपने इतिहास की एक बहुत बड़ी जगह दे रहे हैं, और इसीलिए हमारे इंडिपेंडेंस के वो जो पहला जनरेशन था, उन्होंने तय किया कि हमारा रिपब्लिक जो है, रिपब्लिक डे, वो जो है 26 जनवरी को मनाया जाएगा, और वो दिन होगा जिस दिन कॉन्स्टिट्यूंट असेंबली ने हमारे नई कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन को एक्सेप्ट किया, लागू किया, और अंग्रेजी कानून को, 1935 के जो एक्ट थी, कानून को हमारी जिंदगी से एक तरह से कहिए हटा दिया।
जी, अकबर साहब कहते हैं कि राजतंत्र जब खत्म होता है तो वहां से गणतंत्र की शुरुआत होती है। तो ये राजतंत्र से गणतंत्र तक की यात्रा कैसे होती है और रिपब्लिक के मायने क्या है?
गणतंत्र मतलब सबसे बड़ी जो बात है हमारे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में, वो सिर्फ ये नहीं है कि हमने एक कानून, नए किस्म का कानून बनाए। हमारे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन की जो दिल और जान है, द हार्ट एंड सोल ऑफ आवर कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, वो है हमारे फंडामेंटल प्रिंसिपल्स। और वो फंडामेंटल प्रिंसिपल्स ऐसे हैं जिसको अब कोई बदल नहीं सकता है। तो ये फंडामेंटल प्रिंसिपल में सब मतलब जो है, शुरू में ही ये कहा जाता है कि जो आज़ादी हमें अंग्रेज से मिली है, वो आज़ादी हर नागरिक का हक है, बुनियादी हक है। यानी कि हमारे देश न सिर्फ अंग्रेज से आज़ाद हुआ है, हमारा देश भविष्य के लिए भी किसी भी डिक्टेटरशिप से, किसी भी ऑटोक्रेसी से, किसी भी मतलब आप जो भी कहिए, किसी तरह का एक डिक्टेटरशिप से अब वो बर्दाश्त नहीं कर गया। और हमारी जमहूरियत जो है वो डेमोक्रेसी रहेगी, और डेमोक्रेसी जो है हमारे देश की फंडामेंटल प्रिंसिपल है। डेमोक्रेसी है प्रिंसिपल, फ्रीडम ऑफ फेथ हमारी प्रिंसिपल है, यानी कि हर नागरिक को पूरी आज़ादी है कि जो मजहब वो रखना चाहे वो अपना रख सकता है, और वो सबका, और जिस मजहब का भी हो, वो एक बराबर का नागरिक रहेगा। वैसे कई हमारे प्रिंसिपल्स हैं। सोशलिज्म है, यानी सोशलिज्म का मतलब होता है बेसिकली कि हमारे देश से गरीबी बिल्कुल मिटानी पड़ेगी, और हम देश को एक इकोनॉमिक इक्विटी के तरफ ले जाएंगे। तो ये सब प्रिंसिपल्स जो हैं, ये प्रिंसिपल्स हमारे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के नस में है। ये हमारे देश के जीवन का खून है, जिस खून की वजह से ये देश जीवित
है। जी, अकबर साहब, इसीलिए कहा जाता है कि जनता का जनता के लिए, जनता के द्वारा, और
बिल्कुल
इसमें विशेषाधिकार वर्ग नहीं होगा। जो भी चुनाव होगा वो जनता ही चुनेगी।
बिल्कुल। सबसे असल अगर ताकत है हमारे देश में, तो जनता की ताकत है। सरकारें आती जाती हैं, सरकारें आती जाती रहेंगी, लेकिन जो जनता है वो हमेशा हमारे देश का रीढ़ है, हमारे देश का खून, हमारे देश की, उसकी आवाज जो है हर वक्त बुलंद रहेगी।
Mr. Akbar, coming back to the point where you raised that the Constitution formation, Gandhi said, was a day of celebration, and that celebration we've been carrying it forward even today. Critics, however, argue that the military parade and all of this thing that are seen on Rajpath is a thing of the past. It's a jingoistic nationalism. How do you assess this sentiment? What would you like to say to those critics?
Well, this I find a little curious, this kind of criticism, because what is a nation's armed forces? A nation's armed forces is basically not only symbolic, but the actual structure of security for its ideals. Without our armed forces, our democracy and a state would become vulnerable. And therefore, it is the display essentially of the people's security forces. This is not a display of a government's security forces because we are not a dictatorship. And therefore, it is important to understand that the commander in chief of our security forces, of the Indian Army and all the security forces, is the President of India. It's not the Prime Minister of India, because the Prime Minister of India is the head of an elected government. The President of India is the elected head of the state. And therefore, the armed forces, when they come on display, they are basically a display of India's ability to defend itself. And I may also add here that I'm very, very proud of the fact that when we in our country call our defense forces, then we actually mean what we say. Our country does not have offense forces. We do not believe in aggression. Our armed forces have never, ever in our history indulged in aggression. And you can compare this with the behavior of at least two of our neighbors. But when we say that our defense forces will defend India, we also understand the meaning of defense. That means not an inch of our territory uh, will ever be vulnerable, thanks to the courage and thanks to the idealism even of our defense forces.
Mr. Agwa, coming back to the Constitution again, uh, what is the most unique part or the uniqueness of the Indian Constitution, if you can elaborate on that?
Well, I've mentioned briefly that the unique part is not that it is both the law as well as a set of principles that may be even called higher than the law. And here, very often our constitution is called as, some kind of a replica, sorry, or an offshoot of the Westminster model, which is the British model. But the British model that we talk about is only the structure of the state. The principles that guide us actually have come from a history of humanism, which is part of our India's culture, which is part of India's value system,
Right.
which is part of the way we have behaved for thousands of years, ever since the recorded civilization of our country. Right, yes, there have been other nations also which have reflected such values. I mean, the American Constitution, for example, its principles are there is an echo. The French Revolution provided liberty, equality, fraternity. All these principles have been part of the living principles of India, and they were eventually encapsulated into the fundamental principles of our constitution. And that was, I think, a tremendous work that was done by the genius of Dr. Ambedkar and of the committee that was formed under him. They did, I mean, extraordinary work for its times, unbelievable. For example, I'll give you one example. When India's constitution was being written, we took adult franchise as a given. Under British democracy, during British Raj elections, there was no adult franchise. People forget this. In the 1946 elections and all elections before that, only 10% of India could vote. Only 10%. That means even the vote of 1946, which which was actually used as an excuse for partition, the electorate was only 10%. 90% of the country was not consulted. So it was a sham. It was not a democracy. It was an elitist sham. In India, in our very first elections that were held, and after the constitution, there was complete adult franchise, despite all the same critics, some of whom you mentioned, saying, "Oh, How can India have adult franchise when it has such low levels of literacy? But what has literacy got to do with freedom? Freedom is something we believe in, whether we are literate or illiterate, whether we are rich or we are poor, right? It is a fundamental principle. Freedom of faith is something that Indians believe in. We don't need a school education to tell us that every Indian must and will enjoy complete freedom of faith. And nobody can interfere in this right to freely express your faith, no matter what. And nobody can take away our equality, irrespective of which faith we belong to. So these fundamental principles, as I can see, is the heart and soul of a living mechanism called our constitution. The constitution in India, and India is its constitution.
अकबर साहब 1950 से लेकर अब तक गणतंत्र दिवस का समारोह बड़े भव्य रूप से मनाया जाता है। किस तरह के बदलाव देखे गए और कोई ऐसा समारोह जो सबसे यादगार रहा हो, कुछ यूनिक रहा हो?
समारोह मैंने
गणतंत्र
देश का
दिवस समारोह जी।
मैं तो समझता हूं कि हर इलेक्शन जो होता है हमारे देश में, हर इलेक्शन जो होता है किसी 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 प्रांत का हो, किसी म्युनिसिपैलिटी का हो, किसी ग्राम पंचायत का हो या देश का हो, हर इलेक्शन जो होता है मेरे लिए ये हमारी जमहूरियत, हमारी डेमोक्रेसी के एक बुलंद निशानी है। और इससे इससे बड़ा एक जश्न तो मैं समझ नहीं सकता है कि किसी भी देश का हो सकता है। तो ये समारोह आप समझिए, जो अभी जब हम बात कर रहे हैं एक और इलेक्शन के बीच में हम घूम रहे हैं, तो हर इलेक्शन के सामने बूथ के सामने जो क्यू आपको नजर आएगा ना, वो समारोह हमारे लिए सबसे बड़ी फख्र और सबसे बड़ी प्राइड का एक कारण।
Mr. Akbar, just playing the devil's advocate and expanding this day of celebration, for you as a citizen of India, which has been the most, or rather the best Republic Day celebration for you as a person, as someone who has witnessed it?
Yeah, I think every celebration is a renewal of the same joy that we feel in our nation, the same blessed sense we feel that we are fortunate to have lived in a democracy, that we are fortunate to have lived in a country where from the very beginning of our democratic experience, as I said, there has been adult franchise. I must also stress that there has been gender equality. In 1950, when the constitution was passed, you'd be shocked at the number of countries which did not believe in equality between men and women. But we made it as a fundamental principle. And it's a tremendous, I feel that we are indifferent to our own genius, that we are indifferent to what we have actually created. There are not many countries which can say that they emerged out of the darkness of colonialism in 1947 and within 3 years gave their people a beacon, a light, which has remained not only steadfast, but which has actually shone ever more brightly each year. The nation has been stable precisely because governments may come and governments may go, but the nation and the people, will go on forever under the guidance of the Constitution.
Mr. Akbar, just one final question. Keeping in mind that we are focusing this episode on our young viewers, what would you like to tell them personally in regards to the importance of democracy and strengthening our democracy?
Well, I don't want to be accused of giving sermons to the young for two good reasons, but primarily because they're in no mood to listen to sermons. But they really must understand and recognize uh, the extraordinary heritage, the extraordinary political legacy which they have received. Because every legacy must not only be preserved, every legacy must be multiplied. And it is they who can take this legacy forward and, in fact, give it a tremendous new dimension, which will be relevant to the requirements and to the opportunities and to the splendid miracles ahead of the 21st century.
Mr. Akbar, thank you for your time. We wish you a very happy Republic Day, and thank you again for joining us today at Open Court with MJ. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you, and a very, very happy Republic Day to you both and to every single viewer.